Welcome. Another fantastic morning here, this Thursday morning, and here we are again. And today we've got a really special guest, Sandra Ardenhoff. Sandra is actually a doctor. She's also a master's, and she works at the academia, and she's a lecturer in economics. She's also from the University of Pretoria. Sandra, welcome to the show. Great to have you here today. And we're going to be talking about something that's relevant to all our businesses and to our personal selves, and that's the budget. Now, I know that a war has started in the Middle East, and maybe that's the relevant thing to be talking about, but we will talk a little bit about that a little bit later. But let's just talk about the budget, how it affects us and how it affects our business, but more importantly, what was not said in the budget. And Sandra's going to help us to uncover that. So welcome to you, Sandra. Great to have you here. Let's just quickly, I'm going to quickly introduce each of our co-hosts. Welcome Mana Root. She's a businesswoman here in Pretoria East, and she's got a insurance business. And then we've got Glenn Lees-Jones from Mentorus. He's a man that's going to help us and helps you to actually plan your life and to actually identify your purpose of what you're here to do in this world. The big why. Why are you here? And then we got Wilhelm Lombard. Wilhelm is a teams coach. He actually goes along and looks at your business. He looks at the teams and he actually ensures that they perform to their highest effectiveness. So welcome, Wilhelm. Great to have you guys here. And the reason why we've got different co-hosts is because we all come from different spheres in life. We all come from different industries, and we'll be asking Sandra certain questions from our various perspectives. So welcome to the show. Sandra, great to have you here. It's really nice. And I've listened to Sandra before on the economics. Last time she colored a very colorful picture with the South African flag and the economics. I don't know if she's going to do that today. She's going to give us a surprise. But the big thing here is Sandra's going to talk to us about the budget and how it affects us, and basically also identify and uncover what was not said in the budget and how that may affect us in our business and in our personal lives. So welcome to the show, Sandra. It's great to have you here. And please unmute yourself and take it away.
Hello, David, Mama Wilhelm, and Glenn. It's nice to be here. And it's a privilege to talk about the budget. So I'm going to really talk about the narrative, the story, and actually the story behind the story. Exactly like you said, what they did not say, but also maybe the philosophical background, why we have got such a budget year after year, and what is the philosophy. And then I'll look at the business cycle, the South African economy, and what the government did not address, and I'll end with what the situation may be currently and how that would affect the budget. So this was the second budget of the Government of National Unity, which was absolutely marvelous, and it was approved immediately. But we've got to remember where they come from. So in terms of the philosophical background, the budget is a socialist budget. And if we listen to the president on his State of the Nation address, that was a socialist State of the Nation address. And the budget flows from that. So that is the vision and the mission of the budget, so to speak. And that is the environment in which the government does their business. So that is extremely important to remember, because that's also the reason why, in certain aspects, why we are in the situation where we are. So first of all, I just want to set the ground in terms of what's a budget. The budget is basically government spending, and then they try to tax us up to the maximum, but that leaves us in any developing economy with a deficit. But most importantly, that deficit falls into the pool of government debt, and the government debt is really running away. So, but I'll go into that a bit later on. So this government expenditure is mostly financed by taxes, and it generates this deficit. And this deficit, just like you and me, if you've got a deficit, you go to the bank, you've got to apply for a loan and get a loan. So this deficit's already a problem. So they've already approved government spending, and all the government departments would know this is the amount they've got for the year. So they have to then go and borrow from the market and from the international local market. And then that government deficit would fall into the government debt. But just like your own budget, you try to maximize the difference between your income. So you try to maximize your income and minimize your expenses. And then that is how you want to budget. And government's got the same rules. So there's nothing different there. But we'll come back to that a bit later on. And then very important is also the business cycle. So business cycle is economic activity and the upswings and downswings over time. And over time, you'll find that the economy is still growing. We're much better off than we were in the 1900s or the 1800s or whatever. But still, this upswing and downswing is very important for us. And that affects policy, but I don't want to get into that policy into so much detail. But here you can see since 1994, the trend line is up. So that means the economy did grow. And with this dip year was COVID. And after COVID, we had significant growth. So for 23 months, we had an upswing, so to speak. And they've identified this peak as March 2022. So since March 2022, we were in a downswing, which is also important to remember. So yes, just to get back to it, so I'll follow the flag approach because I really didn't know how to approach this. There's so many facets. It's so interesting. So they've got our government has got a socialist ideology, and I don't want to go into the details, the good or the bad or whatever. But if you follow a more modern or new classical approach, you want to have a small state with little state interference, where the private sector must be involved and where they jointly manage this economy responsibly. And you want to deliver effective services on all levels of society. So therefore, you need fiscal discipline, spending specifically aimed at stimulating economic growth, and it should be transparent. You shouldn't have like a state capture. So I first want to start with this white. So we've got this beautiful country, breathtaking nature, and the government of national unity is actually very special, but we've outgrown the infancy. So in terms of economic policy, monetary policy is managed well. We've got a new inflation target. It's wonderful. It anchors expectations, but I can get into more details with regards to that a bit later. But I think maybe the timing was a bit soon because it would put government or the monetary policy environment, especially now with this war, there will be more inflationary pressures, and interest rates will have to be relatively higher for longer periods. But I don't want to go into that detail. So monetary policy is a separate subject. Fiscal policy is also relatively well managed. I'd say wonderfully managed on macro top level, but not at all levels of government. And we can talk about that in terms of provincial effectiveness. And we can see local effective services delivery is not happening. So there's a huge problem already there. And then the other policy in economics, the big one is financial stability. That's relatively well managed. They got us off the grey list, although the Financial Action Task Force is coming a bit later on this year to check if they are really applying those rules and the legislation that they've put on this list. And but they need to have more proactive instruments, my opinion. We can also have another discussion with regards to that. In terms of environmental management, these floods and extreme droughts and areas that's affected negatively, they should be more creative in terms of providing finance for those poor, fragile businesses. So yes, so that is another story. But to come back to the fiscal policy, that's what we're focusing on now. They are going to, so they make all these promises. So they say there's going to be a fiscal policy rule, but they don't say what. So I don't want to go into that, it's a bit technical. But that's also the International Monetary Fund that's telling them, like inflation targets, you've got a 3% inflation target. They forcing basically fiscal policy now to also have a rule, which they don't have. And they said they're working on that and they'll inform us. But the main thing is our Minister of Finance, he was so excited about telling us about this primary surplus that we've got for 3 years now, a primary surplus. But that means, sure, government revenue is more than expenditure, but it does not include interest on government debt, which is running away. And they have got these projections that the primary deficit will increase over time. In this environment now that we currently have, I doubt it. But the main concern is that you cannot ignore your interest payments. If you think of your own budget, you can't ignore installments on your home loan, your car, your mortgage loan, your credit cards. You can't ignore all of that and say, okay, we're now in a surplus situation. So that is a problem. They have to repay all this installments, basically the interest payments, before they can pay attention to any other expenditure. So interest costs remain high. And in the meanwhile, they are borrowing constantly, which means the interest rates will remain high. It was going to stay that way as long as they're not having a budget that is conducive to growth. So green is growth. So we need a growing economy, and the economy is starting to grow, but this is now before this war. So Department of National Treasury said economic growth would be like 1.6% 2026 and slightly higher over the foreseen period, which for me is good, because they had like unrealistic growth rates in the past, so they're more realistic in that sense. And what's also good is our per capita income will also increase more than the population growth for the first time in a long time. But the problem is our Gini coefficient, which includes how skewly our income is distributed, is running away. And some research institutions say that ours is the worst in the whole world. So our coefficient is 0.65, which is much higher than world average. And it means that our wealth is distributed very unevenly. So we've got a small number of very rich people and a lot of people that's extremely poor. We've got even more millionaires and billionaires than we ever had in the history before. But what we need, if you study economics, is a good middle class. And we're we're the middle class is basically becoming poorer, and we've got a very small, relatively small middle class, and a lot of people living in extreme poverty. The high unemployment and other structural problems in the labor market is very bad. I'll come to that. So our economic growth must accelerate much more to make a difference to the plight of the majority of people in South Africa. So what we also need is blue. We need to take better care of our nature, and especially our water resources. And the agricultural sector should be nurtured. I mentioned that before, the effect of our potential disasters must be managed better for farmers, businesses, and the entire logistical chain. But you get these critiques, people that's critiquing this standpoint. They say agriculture only contributes 2 to 3% to the economy. But you cannot just look like that. At that, the value added of the agriculture is up to 15 to 17% of the total GDP, of the income of the economy. That means milk, say the milk farmer, the dairy, all the dairy products, and everything. So if we take this latest crisis, if farmers are unable to vaccinate their livestock, milk and dairy products and other industries are affected, and they struggle to make a living. And we call it in economics the negative multiplier. So which means is the farmer would suffer, the businesses around them would suffer, and all the whole logistical chain, milk producers, dairy producers, the small shops, etc. They are all, and all the business around this, the hairdresser, the small hardware shop, that will also all become negative. So we cannot afford to have a sector that's neglected like this. And the water is a basic need in the world. In the United Nations is a basic need. And we've got dams that's lovely, they're full in a lot of cases, but the pipelines, we all know about that. So we must take care of that, and that must be repaired. And then this disaster finance, I mentioned financial stability, they must have other models of disaster finance. If we take this latest crisis in the farming sector, they should help the farmers and bridging finance and other type of loans, not a normal banking loan, to manage all these vulnerable in industries, and make it more feasible for them. That is our food, and that is important. So the scarce resources must also be protected. Protection is so important from criminal industries like all the water mafias and all those. So we've got mafias on all sorts of industries that normal countries don't have. And then yellow is sunny, warm, but it's also trouble-like. So if we look at the income side, we had lovely tax adjustments which are gratifying, and there's a list of all the tax rebates basically they gave. SARS under Commissioner Kieswetter, he also had a lot of tax innovative methods. But in economics, we talk about the effective point of tax collection. There's a so-called Laffer curve. And we are beyond that, which means if you increase taxes more, people will just use other methods of evading tax and not paying taxes. So why did they get this? So every year a commissioner Kieswetter is getting more taxes. He's really very, very good. He's doing a magnificent job. And in 2026, it was because of the growth in the mining sector due to higher commodity prices. The mining sector, the profits increased, and he could get more taxes, basically. And then we are familiar with the two-pot system. So I had a large inflow of taxes because of that. But that will also fall away because it's not going to carry on forever. But they also of doing more lifestyle audits. We read in the paper about that. And they're using artificial intelligence to get tax evaders and sophisticated tools. They're using also, they've got a whole unit specializing in sophisticated, creative sort of finance products, such as derivatives, cryptocurrencies, and so on. They are examined more carefully and they are paying more taxes. They are currently also adjusting the formula for gambling, because that's a great source of income for government. And even the sin taxes, they also adjusted, like the vape, etc. So he got an additional tax of 2.127 billion, or 2 trillion, if you put it like that. So the tax base is really very small. There's a few taxpayers, and the additional revenue has created room for small business adjustments. Like they for registration, they need to have more income, and they implementing other rebates, which is really very good for our economy. So that will all stimulate the economy. But the largest source of personal income remains the personal income tax. And although the adjustment of this personal income tax and the tax bracket was positive, medical tax credits positive, for the last few years we had no, so it's just like a reset, so to speak. But this consumers are really struggling to stay afloat. But the problem is also only just more than 26 million people are registered taxpayers, and of those, only 7 million individuals pay taxes, which leaves around 19 million registered people that's not paying taxes. Okay, they fall below the bracket, but they evade taxes and they just don't pay it. So, and another worrying thought is also taxpayers earning more than 750,000 Rand pay more than 60% of all personal tax, which is not sustainable. So you get tax avoidance, evasion, and high income individuals just leave the country. So that is a real problem. And another problem is also company taxes. So 1.2 million companies are registered, but of those, only 21% declare a profit and end up paying taxes. The rest, we do all sorts of creative accounting, and they end up not paying taxes. And for me, this last one is even worse, money laundering. So all the criminals, they just do their criminal activities, and between 62 to 90 billion Rand is lost due to money laundering. And of course, that is a rough estimate because you don't always know exactly what they're doing. So it's difficult to assess how much is really due to money laundering. But red is a danger. So we are approaching the proverbial fiscal cliff. The government debt is just continuously increasing. Government has to borrow to cover their expenses, and they even had it here in their budget. In 2028, the debt to GDP ratio was 23%. That's increased to just under 80%. And if you include the state-owned entities, the situation is even worse, like Eskom, the Land Bank, Transnet, the NEL, South African Airways, and Post Office debts. They alone is also nearly 10% of the total public sector. And what they also do is now they give more and more state guarantees, and the state-owned entities and the guarantees, they don't form part of the official debt. So if you add that debt, it increases from 78 to 88% of the GDP. And we know from state capture and all these subsequent investigations, these enterprises are not managed effectively. And the private sector can do a much better job. And but they are hindered because of socialist ideology. I mean, if you think of the post office as an example, and you compare that to all the Postnet and other in private institutions, post office is really, they can do without it. And the SAA is also one example which they can partly or 100% outsource, etc. So, and why they don't do that? Socialist ideology, because if they sell the post office, it's an inflow of money, which they don't want to do. So, that's for me a bit silly. And then the other item that's really very important, the interest on government debt's around 22%. So they have to pay this interest before they can do anything else. Why do they have to do that? Because we've got they call it a reputational risk. And in South Africa, our government has never ever defaulted on our debts. So our government bonds are really wonderful. And it's a lovely investment. So, which means they're highly sought after. And once they've paid this debt, then they can start with social spending, and then, or the rest of the spending. But if you analyze it, social services and social transfers account for 60% of the budget, which leaves only 40% for spending to stimulate economic growth. So only 40% is left. And the problem with the spending as well is the size of the government. Do we need to have all these provinces? Do we need to have all the government agencies? Do we need to have all these ministers? Do we have, if you include the ministers and the deputies, they are 75 executive ministers, and they all have lovely cars and beautiful houses and protection and all that, compared to 28 in Nelson Mandela's era, 1994, from 28 to 75. And then the government of national unity should reflect on every portfolio, and performance assessments of all public services should be the norm. If you take a country like Japan, you cannot serve in government if you don't have a performance appraisal. And if you don't get a decent performance appraisal, you are off and you are out. So we have got too many departments, too many public servants, and they don't perform optimally because they know there's not a profit generated, and they also not always appointed on merit. And if they're not appointed on merit, they can't manage the portfolio effectively. So that is another red light. And then I want to get to the investment and job creation. So in the State of the Nation address and the budget speech, our Minister of Finance mentioned he made some long-term promises. In the next 3 years, we will address this and that and this and that. He didn't commit money in this year or that year to this or that infrastructure. So it's very vague, and it needs to be actively addressed. We need to have the water repaired now. We especially in water and services delivery. If you look at all these small towns where they're without water for how long, etc. John Maynard Keynes, our famous economist, said, in the long run, we're all dead. And the research has shown that private sector can do much better in collaboration with government, service delivery, infrastructure. But we have to also address supply side structural problems. And that I wanted to include all that, but it can take a whole day. So on the supply side, we have to stimulate the supply side of the economy and eventually end up with efficient infrastructure, transportation, ports, reliable electricity, reliable transport, reliable service delivery on all facets. And then black is very sad. So that's mourning and loss. So because of the socially political mindset, we are way below our potential economic growth rate of 5 to 7%. And what's actually sad is if you read economic literature, they now refer to the potential economic growth rate of 2%, which is totally wrong. It used to be 5 to 7%. The last decade, we didn't even reach 1%. And then we all know about the industries, and especially in the industrial sector, where employment, businesses are closing down, and there's unemployment. They redefined the unemployment rate, but it still didn't help. It's still 31.4%, and it remains a major social problem, especially if you look at the youth unemployment, which is more than 60%. In the past, manufacturing contributed 14% to the GDP, but now they are limited. And they stimulated employment and also the agricultural sector, but they're very small now. So recently, many factories and businesses had to close their door and production declined. We know about all these car manufacturing plants and steel manufacturing plants that closed down. And but I talked about policy earlier. We don't have a modern industrial policy. If you have a modern industrial policy, they look at sectors that stimulate growth and businesses that stimulate growth, and they identify those sectors. And there's a lot of interesting ways they can help. They can give them tax breaks, tax holidays, access to finance, help them with their exports, etc. We don't have that in South Africa. They just let these companies go bankrupt. And if we look at employment, what's also worrying is in South Africa, it's also other countries also the same. Some of developed economies, the services sector is the largest sector with regards to employing people, but in a developing economy, that is not effective because it's more. If you think of how the labor market is divided, you get you get the highly skilled, semi-skilled, and unskilled. And the services sector, like say the financial sector or the medical sector, they've all highly skilled. And what research also have indicated is with regards to artificial intelligence and so on, employment will go down there as well. But we need to have our agricultural sector and a policy with regards to that, assisting them and assisting industrial sector to help with this huge unemployment in our country. And then gold. We've got gold in our flag as well. And with the discovery of gold in the Witwatersrand, gold was intertwined in our economic history and what's currently happening in the world as well. We actually saw it when this weekend with this war in the Middle East with the US and Israel attacking Iran. There's immediately uncertainty. And with regards to uncertainty, we call it the war chest argument. This is actually Iran, sorry. So investors would sell other assets and portfolios and they would buy gold. And central banks would also buy gold. So the gold price have increased. Yesterday it was even higher, much higher, another historical high. And it's also nice. It's not just the gold, but also the stocks, other electronic fund instruments in gold that benefit from these increased commodity prices, like silver as well. But then what they would do is that would strengthen the stock exchange and the value of the rand. So what happened was with this war, there was immediately a shock with regards to emerging market currencies. So the rand started to devalue. But if it wasn't for the investment in gold, it would have been worse. So, but it happens and it contributes to additional tax revenue if we get this inflow. So South Africa is now, because of that, and because we're also off the grey list, we're an attractive destination. So the budget is in the end a practical application of public finances, but we urgently need to involve the private sector. Government cannot do this effectively and deliver services to everyone in the country on all levels. But we have to carry on, build a future together in faith, and advocate for a budget that will make it happen. So with regards to the war, just to come back to that, so immediately what happened was there was a lot of uncertainty in the world, and stock exchanges started to suffer. And like I said, they've got a flight to safe havens, but that's what they call it. So they would go, and interesting enough, in the past, the US was a safe haven. The US is no longer a safe haven. So it's more Britain and European type of countries that's developed that will get most of the investments. But then we, because of the gold, the fact that we've gold and it's managed well, we will get an influx and an increase in the demand for gold and gold type of securities, which would help our country for the immediate future. But the world, in terms of that, so that's one thing that will affect the budget. But the other thing is, I saw that the IMF adjusted the world growth rate from 1.4 to 1.1. So if the world growth rate would go down, that would mean our growth rate projections. So all these projections that we've got will most probably be lower in terms of economic growth. And that would mean that there would be less income to government with regards to their income. But we pray and we hope that it will be a short war. If it's prolonged, obviously the effects would be worse. So thank you very much.
Wow, that was amazing. That's a masterclass, Sandra. And I love the way that you actually put that exactly to the flag, using the colors of the flag. And it actually makes it more memorable. So thank you very much for that fantastic presentation. We have a few questions for you, but before we go there, I'd like to just go around the room and just ask if there are any questions from our co-hosts. And I'm going to start with Mana. Mana?
I think you kind of answered that. The budget is going to change a little bit after the war because we don't know how long it's going to go on. And we also don't know whether Europe is going to join the war as well. By the sound of it, they weren't part of it and then they're part of it. So we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. But there is one thing that I would like to know is you spoke about the gap between the very rich, the small percentage, very rich people, and then the very high percentage of very poor people. In your opinion, what do you think are the main factors contributing to this widening gap between the very poor and the rich people?
Okay, in terms of that, the official reason and the unofficial one. I'll start with the official one. Official one is the economy is not growing. So it was foreseen that we will have an economic growth rate that is a bit higher than the population growth. But if we've got a prolonged war, that wouldn't happen. So the past number of years, they call it per capita growth, was negative. So, or it went down, it was lower consistently. So our economic growth is going to be much higher than the population growth. Otherwise, everybody would be poorer. So that's the first reason. And we don't have a budget that's growth orientated. You need to have a lot of investment. The thing is, they do a lot of, I said, 60% is social spending and 40% the rest. And out of that, the rest, there's just a small percentage left for investment. If you take a bridge is there for the next few generations, a new dam, a new infrastructure. And that's also a concerning fact. They talk about investment like, fixing potholes and fixing the rail network that's not working. That's not investment. That is maintenance. It's not. Although it's very important for growth, because otherwise, in the absence of that, you don't have growth. It's not investment. It's not. We call it a multiplier effect. So if there's a new bridge, and it connects two new towns, you get a huge growth in terms of new businesses and opportunities and employment opportunities that will last for the next number of years. So they've neglected that. They don't look at industries. I mentioned industrial policy. I didn't go into the tariffs. So if every time there's a shock, we're not prepared for the shock. So we weren't prepared for the shock in when President Trump announced all these tariffs. We're not prepared for this Gulf War, the war in the Middle East. We're not prepared for anything like that. So you need to have an industrial policy and focus on industries that's important for export growth. And if there's a problem, then to assist them and guide them in terms of exports, looking at different markets, etc., not go to Dubai or whatever. So that is the reason. And also, the third, it varies between 3 and 4 sector. I didn't go into that as well. Sector where they're spending a lot of money is education. So our government is spending really a lot of money on education, but we are either the lowest or the second lowest in terms of literature, and the literacy levels in the world, which means our education is not effective. So they must really look at the education from preschool to after school, and also get like vocational training, so that everybody doesn't end up with a matric and they adjust the results and stuff and it looks wonderful, but they don't get jobs. They should do that. So that is unofficial. And then the other reason for this is also the crime in our country that's running away. there's a mafia involved in construction. There's a mafia involved at the harbors. There's a mafia involved in every single sector. We know about the Matlanga Commission, the police. It's not safe to do business. You don't want to walk or in the streets after dark, or indoor after hours. So yes, and the crime infiltrates on all levels of society. So that is another major problem, is it's running away, and it seems like they can't get that under control, and that prohibits investment as well. So then especially foreign investors, they don't want to invest here in this environment.
He also mentioned that it's a good idea for the government and the private sector to take hands. And I think we've got a very good example. If you look at the Gautrain, for instance, that was also, if I'm not mistaken, a joint venture between the government and private sector. So it can work. But now we're giving it over to the government, and what's going to happen, we don't know. But that's just a statement. That's me. Thanks.
Thank you, Moana. Thanks very much. Let's go to Glenn. Glenn, do you have any burning questions for Dr. Sandra Ardenhoff?
Thanks, David. Appreciate that. And Sandra, that was absolutely brilliant. Forgive the shaking that I had in the car. That was a bit of a challenge, but we're now sitting down at a place where I can actually not shake. But thank you very much. That was really a thorough talk. Incredible. My question, in fact, was actually the same question that Mana asked. Maybe I can just say something just to add to that. And I was wondering, you spoke about education, and I was actually thinking, I really believe that something should be done in South Africa about entrepreneurship. And I think if we can actually increase that and help entrepreneurs to grow, it'll change things around. It'll actually increase that major gap that we have between the very rich and the very poor at this point in time. So maybe if you can just touch on that, not necessarily a question as such, but maybe you can touch on that. Thanks.
Yes. So that's also one of the supply side constraints. So you, in terms of supply side, you also get like the resources that's running out, etc. But the one major one is entrepreneurs. You're right, and our labor laws. So I don't want to go into the validity of that, but we've got way too many laws in the labor sector. But in that environment, we also need to have an environment where small businesses are encouraged and nurtured. My son is in New Zealand. He took a short period and he registered a new business. So here it's you take months and months and you don't register. It's not friendly. They should make it easier, and also apart from that, so government is starting, but they're limiting it to young people of a certain group, and they are nurturing them. So, but they should across the board assist small businesses in all respects, and also help them with expertise, and have platforms to assist them with marketing, etc. And also, but what I really feel passionate about is developing finance. So South Africa is way beyond, the curve in that respect. So we have to be, but we have to start with that as well, and helping, in situations like, if we take the Kruger National Park and that environment where they had all those floods, those poor farmers, they in dire straits now, and the banks, they've got loans, etc. So they must assist them with financing and expertise to help them rebuild that sector, and we don't have that in South Africa. And that farmer, say it's there's some fantastic farmers there. They just need to have bridging finance for a period or whatever. And another thing that's also important is they call it the East Asian tigers. So those countries like Thailand, Taiwan, etc., they had a policy of stimulating the export sector, and they had export processing zones. So in South Africa, we had a little zone in the Eastern Cape, but now those businesses are going bankrupt, and the government's not really helping them. So zones, export areas closer to the harbour, etc., or make it easier for them to get to the harbour. We should have railways that's actually functioning effectively, and make it easier so that they're not on the roads all the time. And we've got all these potholes, etc. And long story short, to help these, but apart from that, also to have them tax breaks and make it give them tax holiday for first 5 years. They don't need to pay taxes, and to help them just get on their feet, etc. So we need to be creative. That's part of the industrial policy that we just don't have.
Well said, Sandra. Brilliant. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Thanks,
Thank
David.
you,
Back to you.
Thank you, Sandra. Thanks, Glenn. Wilhelm, what is your burning question that you have for Sandra?
I'm the energy guy, but I'm drained after this. Sorry, Sandra. I only there's doing the right things right. I focus on doing the right things right, and then there's some people that do the right things wrong, and then there's others that do the wrong things right, and some others do wrong things wrong all over. So I'm a bit drained today. Luckily, my beautiful wife bring me a cup of coffee, so that helped me a little bit. But what can we do to get the energy back? We need to energize. Maybe our government needs a bomb. Some fire underneath to just get the energy right, because we all know what should we do, what's the right things to do, but some people that actually should do it don't know or don't do it. Thing that struck me for the first time, sort of, maybe I'm stupid, but I'm not into economics, is that when you mention the fact that this is a socialistic type of budget, and when you explain it, I understand it, and it's definitely not for the benefit of the country. It's I don't understand. Okay, bottom line is we need to take responsibility, because those guys are not taking responsibility. So the question is, what are we going to do about it?
But you're so spot on. The government cannot do it on their own. They just can't. And I mentioned the expertise. So they got rid of expertise. And we've got load shedding here every now and then. So we've got now inverters, and we're on the point of also getting solar panels. But our Minister of Energy is very proud of, reaching their targets or whatever. But if you go into the numbers, you can see it's because of the private sector, really starting and energizing themselves, so to speak. And but the small businesses, my husband's, they've also got a big. They're a German company, but they're very big. But in their business, they've got, for example, chemical plants, so they need to have constant flow of electricity. And they've got huge generators now, because you don't get constant flows of energy, but that costs us so much money. And he said that all the other industries, most of them they just went bankrupt, and they're just leaving them. And now the government is thinking they can import cheap Chinese steel that's substandard. So so they call it import. So they import it instead of encouraging firms to export. So if you import, you lose revenue for your country, But if you export, you stimulate economic growth, and you get an industry that's bigger, and they're generating jobs, etc. And like you said, I remember when I was at the university, we did some research on if even the at a school, we did on what happens if you energize even like a school that's got electricity versus a school that does not have, and how that constrains the poor kids in terms of their learning experiences and the environment and so on, and how many small businesses are just going out of business because of now unreliable electricity, and all these on and off electricity. So I agree with you. It's one of the major aspects. So they've got this unit that Vulindlela unit, and it helped to get the electricity sort of more organized. And they're going to focus now. Government's going to focus now on the water generation. If that works, it will be wonderful. But they should also take care, because I feel our power station is a national key point, but they don't protect that. Have you ever seen a policeman around one of those? And then the mafia people come and they steal all the steel cables and they export it to all over the world. Yeah, so I agree with you. It is essential and critical, that infrastructure, to generate growth.
Wow, thank you. Thanks, Wilhelm. Thanks,
Thank
Sandra.
you.
I've got a question. So if we fast forward 5 years hence, what do you believe that needs to change to actually change the South Africans' economic policy, so that we can say this budget speech actually made a change in South Africa? What would you suggest?
Okay, so in terms of the primary surplus, that's a surplus, that is lovely. They should carry on with that. But the whole point is they should get rid of government debt. So they cannot keep on borrowing and, let this debt run away. Just like me and you just can't carry on, borrowing. So government debt needs to be managed, and it needs to get smaller. And it can decrease significantly by getting the private sector involved. And for example, if we take SAA is running at a loss every single year. They try to color it in with sort of guarantees and stuff, and but that doesn't help. But when Richard Branson wanted to buy a section of the SAA, they said no. But Virgin can do a much better job than our SAA on their own. They don't need to sell the whole SAA, but ideally I would say yes. And I don't think we need to have all these provinces. So the government of national unity should get together and decide how many provinces do we really need, and then start to plan around that. And do we need all these state departments, and get private sector to assist with regards to that, with the roads, and I saw this Castle Gate area in Pretoria that was done by the private sector. And not stop the private sector if they do want to rebuild and help with bridges and roads, to help them. So long story, if you look at the budget, so basically the Minister of Revenue, the Commissioner, he is trying to get as much income possibly. So I don't think they can get more income. The only way they can get more income is to let the economy grow. And if the economy is growing, then we can generate more income. And what happens is, if the economy is growing, you will have to have a economic growth friendly budget that will create jobs and stimulate economic growth. And so that would be the turning point. And to at least have a budget that's balanced. So if you look at economic crises in the world, for example, Argentina a few times, and when the Eastern Bloc countries like Estonia, Lithuania, and those countries, when they became independent, they had to have a balanced budget. So the government spending must be equal to the taxes. It cannot be more. And then those spending must be growth friendly and employment stimulating friendly. And then we will be happy and we will have a lovely South Africa.
You know, I want to remind me of a story. Well, actually, it's a real story. When I was living in Mauritius many years ago, I can't remember exactly the year, but I think it was 1993 or 94. The government of Mauritius decided to have a tax-free year. So they continue to, they don't have VAT, they have another type of tax there, but they basically let every single person who actually pays, PAYE, and so they gave them a tax-free year. The stimulation of that in the economy was immense. And you could actually physically see what actually took place in that economy just by actually not charging tax to the individuals. So that was basically for me a groundbreaker, and it allowed individuals to buy things, to continue to actually to invest money into their homes, etc. And it was it actually changed the whole of Mauritius from what I actually physically saw when I was living there. So, that's something that could also happen. But the other thing that I understand, obviously, is, the South African government has committed to creating jobs. And one of the places that they could create jobs is actually by employing more people within their, the governmental sectors. And obviously now they have landed with that and they have to keep those jobs. What is your view on that, Sandra?
Okay, so two things with regards, I'm just coming back to the Mauritius argument as well. Their company tax also much lower than South Africa. So we need to lower the company taxes as well and make it interesting and worthwhile for foreigners to come to South Africa and invest here. We need foreign direct investment. And then in terms of governments, government should not be responsible for creating jobs. So what they did now with this, they re-engineered. Okay, it is in line with international standards, but you now get different definitions of unemployment, and they include temporary work that's like just painting the wall in some government building. That's also employment. That is not ideal. We should rather have the private sector involved, and like I said, the sectors that's creating jobs effectively, and also we've got this large unemployment sector in that's lowly skilled. They should rather focus on employing those people and also getting them a better education and more like a vocational education, so that they can do something creative and be employed and start their own business, etc. In both the primary sector, that is the farming, and the mining, etc., and then also the industrial sector, so that they can be involved in that and have skills and attributes to assist them. and to guide them than just to give education a lot of money and sit back. And they have to re-engineer the whole educational system. And if you travel a lot, so I've traveled in December, we need a strong middle class. If you take a country like New Zealand's got just got a few people that's rich and a few people that's poor. The biggest chunk of that economy is middle class. And we need a lot of middle class people, and middle class entrepreneurs. And if you go to Europe, you see these small shops all over. In South Africa, we get these malls. So one builder's warehouse would push out a small little shop that can do maintenance and sell repair type of things, etc. That's just an example. So which will stimulate smaller businesses as well. So that's my take.
Sure, thank you so much. Sandra, we've gone over time, but I think we could actually be here all day talking, and there are a number of questions I have. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to put these questions in the comments, and then perhaps we can address those questions. I'm going to just quickly go around the room and ask each of our co-hosts their takeaway for today, and then I'm going to ask you just to sum up, Sandra. Mana, what is your takeaway from what Sandra shared with us today?
Well, I think in Afrikaans we would say hulle tap water uit 'n klip uit. I think that's what our government is doing. It's running us dry. The small percentage of business and individuals who are able to pay taxes, they are running us dry. They're going to have to get an alternative. They're going to have to take hand to the private sector, and we're going to have to do it together. I mean, if each one of us is just do our little part, maybe we'll get somewhere. But we can't rely on the government. That's my takeaway. We need to take care of ourselves, and hopefully maybe something else will happen in the future. But yeah, I'm not too positive though, because I mean, how long can we pay? We're not enough people that are contributing to the government at the moment, or the economy for that matter.
Thank you, Mana. Thank you. Let's go to Glenn. Glenn?
Thanks, David, and thanks again, Sandra. That was really brilliant. It's interesting. I really believe there's so much opportunity still in South Africa, and it was Les Brown. He took a statement from, I think it was a chap by the name of Whitney Young, and he said this comment. He said, "It's better to be prepared for an opportunity and not have one than to have an opportunity and not be prepared." And really, I think we need to be more prepared for things from our government side as well. So that's me. Thank you very much. Really great.
Thank you, Glenn, so much. Thanks. Willem, what is your takeaway?
No, thank you, David. I think the good news of all this bad news is that there's lots to be done, and we must just take the responsibility, change attitudes of people, get their energy, a positive energy from people or into people. So we must work on ways to change the mindsets of people, and we are busy killing our country, so we must stop that now and work hard to build it up. So building is the key word. If you do something, if you say something that breaks down, stop saying shut up and say something good to build up and go up. And I must go now. Sorry. Thank you, guys.
All right. Thanks, Willem. Yeah, so from my point of view, obviously budgets tell us what the government plans to do, but economists such as Sandra, we actually learn from you and we become more aware and we have more clarity. So Sandra, I really like to thank you for being on the session today. You've shared a huge amount of information. I really appreciate that. And for me, I'm much more clearer now of where we're going and where the government plans for us to go. And from that, we can make a decision of where we want to go and how we can actually help to actually build this economy. So I really thank you very much for being here. Sandra, would you like to just wrap up the discussion and just give a conclusion from your side?
Oh, yes, thanks for the opportunity. It was lovely, and it's always lovely to talk to the private sector. And you're all so important. And it is really true what Glenn said. We are all important, and it's very important also to be positive, to remain positive, and so on. But we have to build and start doing it ourselves, and not wait for government. And that's also important. And but at the end, also, when I discussed this potential war, there's more fiscal policy. So on a macro point of view, they've got they do a relatively good job, but we need to get to the service delivery, and that is where you need the private sector involvement. You need the local farmer to help build the bridge. We saw a few examples of that. That's a typical thing, how it can work. And we should also create an environment. Government should create an environment for the private sector so that it is easier for them to assist, and then we can build on a South Africa, because I think we've still got a lovely country and a lovely future.
Thank you so much, Sandra. Thank you so much. So just from Vision 2025, we're here to give expertise a voice, and I'd just like to thank our co-hosts and especially our guest speaker, Dr. Sandra Ardenhoff. If you've got any questions, please put them in the chat or in the comments below, and we will get back to you and answer those questions. So thank you very much. Take care and have a fantastic week. We'll see you next week. And next week, we're going to be talking about cybercrime in business and how it can affect you. And what you can do about it. So be there. Thank you. Cheerio. Take care. Bye.